Good morning, and welcome to First Unitarian Church in the first 10 o'clock service that we've had for the upcoming season. And for the next 15 weeks, 10 o'clock will be our time. About the time you get used to remembering that, 2 weeks from now, it's going to be 8:30. But we put that in the order of service, so perhaps you will remember when to come. Thank you, David, for reminding us of the Requiem, which was part of our service last Sunday. And I noticed that you and John Rudder got together and worked on a kind of an improvised aspect, but I could hear some of the music that I had sung. Do any of you know what an earworm is? Singers, they sing something over and over and over again for weeks and weeks, and then they stop. And they're walking down the street, minding their own business, and that song comes back, and they can't get it out. So I've had earworms of John Rudder's Requiem all week, and now maybe I can hear this version of it instead. The theme of our service today is one that's very meaningful to me. As a minister, I've had a lot of times in which it was entrusted to me to help nurture change in a group. And the kind of change that is most effective, but the most challenging, is when people are going along in their lives and they think a certain way, and then something happens, and that business as usual way is challenged, and they think, how could I have not noticed that? Here I am this age and I still didn't. As I look back, the first time that happened to me must have been in upper elementary school, perhaps, because I lived in a neighborhood in Kansas City, Kansas, that was a kind of a blue-collar, working class. I like to say everybody but us in the neighborhood had some relative living upstairs that didn't speak English. And I took it for granted that some of the kids in my neighborhood went to a Catholic school, St. Agnes, and some went to a Lutheran school, the Our Savior's School. And then there were another group that we all played with out on the vacant lots. And they went to a school called Crispus Attucks. I didn't know what that meant. I thought they were talking about a school that met in the attic. And I just call it attic school. And then there were the rest of us that went to a public school called Macachak. And that was a Shawnee Indian chief who we were told was buried under the basement and would haunt us if we didn't behave. And I took all of this for granted until something came along that told me that, yes, the kids who went to the Catholic and the Lutheran schools, their parents had to pay extra for that. They paid the taxes for the school I went to, but then they had to pay for that one. And the kids that went to Attucks school, yeah, they were African Americans. It was one of those moments. They couldn't go to any of these other schools. The law said this is the one they had to go to. And then about the time when I was in the 9th grade, Brown versus Topeka Board of Education came along, and suddenly all these rules were changed. It didn't occur to me that there was a law that said African American children have to go to one school and they can't go to my school. Well, I have had a series of epiphanies about race, for example, all the rest of my life, where something that I assumed was a choice was something that society had imposed. And so today, I'm going to be offering some examples of that, especially in recent times. And perhaps those of you will say, yeah, I've had some of those slap your head on your forehead moments. I just assumed, I thought I understood how race relations went. And now I realize how forces beyond any of our control were really in control. And so I invite you to participate in this service as different things that we do: music, reflections, the sermon, and then a very special event at the very last will help us, I hope, take a major step forward in our awareness. I invite you to come into this place of peace and let its silence heal your spirit. Come into this place of memory and let its story warm your soul. Come into this place of prophetic power and let its vision transform your heart. Symbol of light, symbol of knowledge, symbol of warmth, symbol of freedom. We light this chalice as a symbol of our faith. Here we gather to celebrate hope and the infinite possibilities of love. Our opening hymn is number 148, Let Freedom Span Both East and West.
In
I'd like to tell a little story about something that happened to me in the spring of 1968. I had been the editor of my denomination's weekly newspaper. This was right in the heat of the civil rights movement, and in the South, some of our congregations were actually merging black and white. Some were resisting. The colleges at that time, all of which had been segregated, were wrestling with whether they should integrate. And I wrote some editorials in favor of integration, and I put out some very bad news about how we had some African American colleges, and the scandal was they were supported by the segregationists who did not want those students in their white schools. So I wrote about that, and one of the people who had run one of those organizations sued the publishing company for $100,000. And I lost my job. And we had a child who was a few months old. And right in the midst of that, on April 4th of 1968, Martin Luther King was assassinated. And with Carol's full support, I took about all the money we had left in the bank and got on a Greyhound bus and rode it from Austin, Texas, across Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama, to Atlanta. And it seemed like most of the stops that we made were in traditional African American college towns. And there was a time when I looked and I realized I was the only white person in the bus, but I and the other students had tears of grief and rage, and I never felt more at home in all my life. Well, when we got to Atlanta, I went to Morehouse College, that was Dr. King's alma mater, and they were having a procession into their auditorium. Long lines out in the quadrangle, and we walked step by step until finally I was able to stand in front of Dr. King's body. And they'd made no effort to conceal the bullet wound in his neck. Well, as I was walking, I couldn't help thinking about the time I saw Dr. King when he was alive. Carol and I and several other Harvard Divinity School students had started an inner-city ministry where during the week had a lot of African American kids came in and for tutoring, and on Sundays they'd come to church. Well, we heard that Dr. King was going to speak at the Harvard Memorial Church, so instead of bringing the kids to our church, we took 60 of these children to Harvard Memorial Church, and we got there real early and sat in the first 3 rows. Well, eventually it was time for Dr. King to speak, and we got word that his plane was in the soup above Logan Airport, and he hadn't landed yet. And I always remember the president of Harvard University, Nathan Marsh Pusey, led what back in my church we call a song fest. People would raise their hand and call out a number, and he would lead it. And I thought, well, I'm home. I'm at Harvard, but I'm home. Eventually, Dr. King came. He came through the door, walked right into the pulpit. The Harvard Memorial Church is just like this one, only about 3 times bigger, but the architecture is the same Christopher Wren architecture. And he spoke about sleeping through a revolution. And he reminded people of how Rip Van Winkle went to sleep, and when he did, King George was the ruler. And when he woke up 20 years later, President George was the leader, and he had figured out how it happened. And Dr. King warned the Harvard professors and students and our 60 kids, don't sleep through a revolution this time. Well, I was driving the church van, and some kids were in the back. Anybody remember what Dr. King said? Yes, one little girl said, don't sleep through a revolution. And something went off in my mind, one of those moments where if you're a really good preacher, you can preach to the Harvard professors and the kids from Boston South End at the same time, using the same words, and they all get something out of it. Those were the thoughts that I had as I was walking down to see Dr. King's body. Well, the next day, we had a procession, and hundreds of thousands of people lined up. It was about 3 miles from the church where they had one service. They were going to have another service out at the Morehouse College. We all walked along, and people would sing. And sometimes you'd be kind of in the middle. Somebody would be singing one song in front of you, and someone would be singing another song behind you. And to see which of those do I like. So I stepped back a couple of steps. Okay, now we can sing "We Shall Overcome." But I stepped forward one time, and I looked around to my left and to my right, and I saw over here was the singer Eartha Kitt standing right next to the actor Sidney Poitier. And they were all singing. I looked over to my right, and there was a man named Whitney Young, who was the president of the Urban League at that time, and he was walking along with Mayor John Lindsay of New York City. Well, Whitney was from Atlanta, and as we walked down this street, he had been the dean of the college that we were going to, and it seemed like everybody out on the front porch was waving at Whitney. And I remember Mayor Lindsay saying, "They really like you around here." Yes. He says, "Well, what is that song everybody's singing?" And this is why I remember this. The words came from Whitney Young. "Mayor Lindsay, I understand you think you might be wanting to run for president someday. If you don't learn the words to Amazing Grace, all the words, the black version and the white version, you're not going to get any votes in the South." So today we're going to hear, I don't know whether we're going to hear a white version or a black version, but I want to introduce to you a speaker and singer by the name of Wintrey Phipps, a presentation he made at Carnegie Hall. You can look it up on YouTube, get his name in Amazing Grace. You can also see him performing it at President Obama's 2012 inaugural worship service. So let's listen now to what I call Black Keys by Wintrey Phipps. I would like to introduce Jasmine Mae to you. I first heard Jasmine sing here in this building several months ago when we had a Jazz Vespers tribute to Aretha Franklin. Some of you know Aretha Franklin grew up singing in the church. Her father was a famous preacher, and his radio programs went all over the country, and his little 8-year-old daughter, Aretha, started singing gospel songs. And all the time that she has grown in jazz and pop and soul, I could always hear the gospel in the background. And I went up to Jasmine that night, and I said, I really loved how you captured the spirit of Aretha. I'm going to let you take over this story in just a minute, so number one, I'll get it right, and I won't embarrass her. But she said, actually, I didn't grow up with that music. Here's how I grew up. You want to tell a little bit something about how you grew up?
Is this on? Oh, it is. Yeah, so when he approached me about singing, he reminded me of the story that he just told. So basically, how I grew up was mainly within the white culture. My mom's white, my dad's black, but I wasn't raised with my dad. So I was raised with my grandma right here. But I was like, no, I grew up listening to Neil Diamond and Rod Stewart and the Beatles. And actually my stepdad is really into like heavy metal and classic rock. So Rush was my first concert. You know Rush. So recently I actually joined a band a couple years ago with all black men in the band, and they were like, you don't know any soul music and all this stuff. So Courtney actually plays for the Jazz Vespers, and he told me, he's like, I'm going to challenge you, and you need to release this inner black girl you have trapped within you. So we're going to have you come and sing Aretha. And I was like, oh no, but I'm half white, so I can't represent her right because I'm not black. I'm not all the way black. And it's been interesting being mixed. There's a lot of stereotypes that come with being black in the culture, and I think there's a difference between culture and stereotype. And as a mixed girl, I was raised thinking that my culture was the stereotype, and I associated myself with those things. I was like, but I don't like rap music. Like, I don't eat fried chicken all the time and watermelon. And, I'm like trying to think of this and like, okay, yeah, my dad's not around, so all black guys are bad then. All black guys are bad. And never date a black guy because they'll leave you and they're mean. They all do drugs and they're all in gangs, So I actually started to hate my own race, and I started to hate myself even more. So it's been a huge journey for me to accept my black culture, not the stereotype, but the culture, and to accept myself. And I still have moments where I walk down the street and I'm like, oh, like I have these stereotypes and judgments. And it's funny because I'm friends with all the black guys in my band, and I'm like, I understand white people sometimes, but I also said black people sometimes. I get it. Like there's times where I go, oh, he's kind of scary. Or there's some guys that live down the street from me, and someone stole stuff out of my car, and the first thought I had was it was probably the black guys at the end of the street. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like people do that to me, and I'm not that person. So the song that I chose today it's by Alicia Keys. It's called If I Ain't Got You. And it was the first song I sang when I was younger. And I really looked up to her because she was the first black woman that I saw on a stage with a piano who was intelligent, who wasn't the stereotype. And I looked up to her, and it made me appreciate myself and love myself. So I'll sing this song. Some people live for fortune. Some people live just for the fame. Some people live for the power, yeah. Some people live just to play the game. Some people think that the physical things define what's within. But I've been there before, but that life's a bore so full of the superficial. But some people want it all, and I don't want nothing at all. If it ain't you, baby, if I got you, baby. Some people want diamond rings, some just want everything. Everything means nothing if I ain't got. Some people search for the fountain, promises forever yours. Some people need 3 dozen roses, 'cause that's the only way to prove you love them. Hand me the world on a silver platter, and what good would it be? No one to care, and no one who truly cares for me. But some people want it all. I don't want nothing at all. If it ain't you, baby, if I got you, baby. Some people want diamond rings, some just want everything. Everything means nothing if I ain't got. Some people want it all, want nothing at all. If it ain't you, baby, if I ain't got you, baby. Some people want diamond rings, want everything. It means nothing if I ain't got. If I ain't got you with me, baby. Oh, well, nothing in this whole wide world won't mean a thing if I ain't got you with me, baby.
Wow. Is anyone here for the first time? Please stand. If enough of you stand, we'll have her back. I want to call your attention to a little square in the back, important upcoming dates. As I said, most of the Sundays from now on for several weeks will be at 10 o'clock. June 7th, it's at 8:30. There are still some things that never change, and one of them is the offering. And so now I'll ask the ushers to come forward. Let the offerings be received.
Harold actually suggested that I sing this song, but I love that he chose it. I'm going to sing A Change Gonna Come by Sam Cooke, and I think this fits perfect with change is happening, you know. So let's do it. I was born by the river in a little tent. Oh, and just like the river, I've been running ever since. It's been a long time coming, but I know change gon' come. Oh, yes it will. It's been too hard living, but I'm afraid to die, 'cause I don't know what's up there beyond the sky. It's been a long time coming, but I know change gon' come. Oh, yes it will. I go to the movies and I go downtown. Somebody keep telling me no, don't hang around. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change gon' come. Oh, yes it will. Then I go to my brother and I say, brother, help me please. Then he winds up knocking me back down on my knees. Oh, there've been times that I thought I couldn't last for long, but now I think I'm able to carry on. It's been a long time coming. A change gon' come. Oh, yes it will. Oh, yes it will. Thank you.
Well, I had a 45-minute sermon prepared, and I have some little letters down the sides of one-sentence summaries of what that would have been. But what I would like to leave with you today is the shift that's going on in our culture, where the term racism and racist has almost lost its moral power. People can say, I'm not a racist, but, and then they bring racism back into it because it's a subjective state of mind. And who am I to judge what your state of mind is? What I'd like to leave you with is to be aware that there is a shift toward the term privilege. Privilege is the sense that you have unearned power. You were born with it. You'll have it until the day you die, and you did nothing except to be fortunate to have white skin. The Unitarian Universalist Association has been, for the last 20 years, developing programs for people to become more aware of how do I know about my privilege and what do I do about it. Here's a couple of things that a book by the author Debbie Irving. She wrote a book called Waking Up White. And some of her awakening to her privilege, notice that there are things she does that seem totally harmless and totally absent of any kind of racial components, except the way she says it is, most white people act this way, and most African Americans look at that and say, that's white. For instance, be kind at all times. Avoid conflict until it all blows up, and then you say a whole lot of things you're sorry for. It's more important to have formal education than it is to be aware of your own life experiences. That to shoot for comfort and entitlement is right, regardless of who it hurts. If it hurts somebody, well, sorry, that's just the way it is. Either or thinking. There aren't many different possible ways to view a situation. So if I view it from my situation, that's the end of the discussion. I don't want to hear that other people have other points of view. And if people say, well, but you grew up a certain way, and African Americans grew up a different way, and if you would talk to each other, you might be surprised how different they are. You've seen the surveys, particularly the ones in Ferguson, where any question that was asked about what was going on, roughly, in the polls, 2/3 of the white people being polled would view it one way, and 2/3 of the African Americans would view it another way. So it's not a matter of one being right and one being wrong. It is that there's just this gap. And until you know one another, and until you have people that you can trust who will tell you, how does that look to you? Here's how it looks to me. How does it look to you? I want to call your attention to a study that was done by the director of the UUA Faith in Action Committee back in around 2000. His name was William Gardner, and he described 6 types of Unitarian congregations, 6 stages that Unitarian congregations find themselves in or have in the past. And in this study, he asked you to say, in your own personal life, which of these stages do you find comfortable to you and uncomfortable? And what about the church you're in? Stage 1 is the old segregation by law stage. You are one culture, segregated, but so is everybody else. And the statement that Sunday morning at 11 o'clock is still the most segregated hour in the lives of most Americans would be true of stage 1. Stage 2, Gardner says, is unintentional, but the results are the same. It's not by law, it's by custom that people think only about themselves a passive stage 2 congregation maintains white power and privilege, intentional or unintentional, but their policies, their practices, their leadership, the situations that come into their decision-making processes are just one kind. He talks about stage 3 congregations that are involved in symbolic change. And he says this is the typical liberal mainline institutions, businesses, universities, churches, even progressive corporations. You have lots of resolutions that say the right things. You put policies out there that do the right things, but you want to be real careful not to make anything happen that follows those. So you talk the talk, as we used to say, as long as you don't walk the walk. Stage 4, he describes congregations that have awakened to this sense of privilege. They realize how profoundly everything they do and say and think and decide are based on making sure that their privileges are not challenged. And so a stage 4 congregation develops and tries to develop an intentional identity in which destroying the benefits of the privilege, or at least using those benefits for something positive, permeates everything that goes on in the congregation. Stage 5, the transformations are already underway, and anybody who walks in can see, wow, this isn't like I'm used to seeing a white church, or this isn't, I've been going for 10 years, this isn't how that church was when I was here 10 years ago. So a stage 5 church is making obvious, profound, and deep-seated changes, and they're restructuring everything that has to be challenged. It's almost like, you have an environmental impact statement. Churches in stage 5 start asking themselves, they have to have a privilege impact statement. And then finally, in stage 6, these are truly inclusive, transformed congregations. And what Reverend Gardner does at the end is he says, if every congregation would move up one stage, not everybody that's in stage 1 has to be at stage 6 by day after tomorrow, but a change is going to come. So that's how I want to encourage us to realize, what stage do you think yourself, what stage are you most comfortable in? And what stage would you dream that this congregation would move to? Where are we? If we moved up one stage, what stage would that be? I encourage you and exhort you to give serious reflection to where we are and where we want to be. Our closing hymn, number 407, is a picture of what this congregation or any congregation would look like if everyone was welcome. We're going to sit at the welcome table. Now, this version in this hymnal only has 3 verses. But the way I was raised in it, there were a couple of other verses. One about we're going to have a land of milk and honey. And then there's another verse, kind of a mock seriousness. I'm going to tell God on you. So, the way we're going to sing this song, everybody's going to sing the first verse. And then I'm going to, Lissa and Amanda, why don't you come wherever you're going to be? Because in between the verses, they're going to sing a couple of my favorite songs as a duet, and then we'll get into the second verse and the third verse. So let's everyone stand and sing the welcome table. Thank you. Ah. Let's close with these words from Dr. King. I refuse to accept the view that mankind is so tragically bound to the starless midnight of racism that the bright daybreak of peace and brotherhood can never become a reality. I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word. Now I'd like to tell you a little bit about something exciting that's going on in this congregation. Several weeks ago, a group began to gather to read that book that I mentioned, Waking Up White. And after reading it, people didn't want to just leave it like, well, yeah, isn't that terrible? They said, our church would like to move in this direction. So a group that had been a book group began to form a committee to develop what now has become called the Anti-Racism Committee. They've written up their goals. They've submitted their charter to the Social Justice Council, who unanimously approved it. So that approved charter has gone to the board and also to Reverend Tom Goldsmith, and everywhere there is enthusiastic approval that we go forward with this committee. Today is kind of the official time when the committee will be inviting other people to join and be members at various levels of involvement. There are a number of congregations I read about in the current issue of the UU magazine, UU World. Black Lives Matter banners bring out conversations. The article goes on to talk about a couple of dozen of congregations that have actually got the banner, associated themselves with the Black Lives Matter banner, have talked it over with congregational members who say, well, don't all lives matter? Why would we say it that way? And that becomes a matter of conversation. Well, I'd like to invite those who have been a part of that planning committee to come down and present to the congregation our own Black Lives Matter. It's backwards. Oh, no, it is not. I'm the only one that can't see it. Thank you. They're going to take the banner over to the corner where there is a table, and you can sign up to be a part of this group. And that way you will learn about if there's going to be classes, guest speakers, rallies, impromptu protests, wherever we can become present. It's taken some of us back to the Tim DeChristopher days, isn't it? We're ready when injustice is there. So go on out through the door and set up out there. Thank you.